Ladies and gentlemen, on today's episode, it is all about jerkbaits. Specifically, what you really need to focus on when jerkbait fishing to increase your chances of getting bit. And what I think is and isn't important might actually surprise you. All that and more in this episode of Tackle Talk.
Hello, everybody. I'm Bill Dance, and you're listening to Tackle Talk.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to the Tackle Talk podcast. We have a lot to go over today. We are going to dive headfirst into jerkbaits here in just a little bit. But before we get started today, the first thing I want everybody to know here as you're listening to the episode is a little bit of a status update for you all, the listeners here. If I sound a little bit different today, that is because, well, the hard drive that I have used for the last 6 years that has every bit of everything I've ever done for the Tackle Talk podcast broke completely. That means every past episode, every guest interview, every graphic, every contract, photo, media kit, logos, our cover images, everything is completely gone. So I don't have a single file of anything that I have done for Tackle Talk for the past 6 years currently. So that means I'm having to reinvent the wheel a little bit in terms of how we do the show. I lost our intro. I lost the file and the program that I used to actually record this show with all the presets and the post-edit sound settings and all that kind of stuff. So I'm going to try my best to slap some Band-Aids together here and to really get through this so it doesn't sound too much different than what you're normally used to. And maybe if I can work some magic, I don't know, maybe it'll sound a little bit better. I don't know. I'll have to reinvent the settings that I use for Tackle Talk. But hopefully I'm able to dial this in and get close. But just in case you notice any differences in the sound today, that would be why. Now, I have sent my external hard drive to someone here locally that is going to try and fix it and recover the data, but there's no promises there. So in the meantime, as I try to get myself dialed back in here over the next few weeks, I appreciate you all bearing with me as I try to get this thing kind of put back together. Okay, the next little bit of housekeeping here really fast. I'm sure there are a lot of you that are tuning in this week that are pretty dialed into the fishing scene or the online kind of like media side of fishing, and you are wondering if we are going to mention the kayak cheating scandal that broke this weekend that is continuing to break as we speak online and everybody is talking about. And the short answer here is no. We are not going to talk about it today because, one, facts are still coming out, and I try not to cover anything until you have more official sources that kind of come out to corroborate things versus just internet hearsay and photos and kind of drama YouTubers and people like that. But two, we're not going to talk about it today because it doesn't make you a better angler. It doesn't educate you. It does not help you catch more fish. It doesn't provide anything of value to you except feeding into that sort of innate desire for drama and negativity and all that kind of stuff. And if you want that, trust me, there are plenty of other places and other people that you can seek out that will feed that beast for you. YouTube channels and online talking heads that capitalize on, the sensationalism and the drama for clicks and views. There are plenty of those out there. They are a dime a dozen. If that's what you want to listen to, you are in the wrong place today. That's just not who we are here at Tackle Talk. So no, we will not be devoting any time today to that whole story. If it's true, it's a shame. That individual deserves every bit of criticism and punishment that comes their way. And that's all we're going to say about it. So that is that. I think that wraps up our housekeeping for today. Now let's get to the good stuff. Okay, today we have a great topic that I actually want to spend the entire episode on because I think it's that important this time of year. So that means no fishing poll today, no other news or anything like that. We do have one mailbag question that's actually related to it, but that is it because today is a down and dirty one topic deep dive into one bait in specific that is glued in my hands this time of year, and it should be for most of you too that are listening to this, and that is a jerkbait. So quite simply, here in the Midwest and in many other parts of the country, it is jerkbait season. For the last 4 or 5 times that I've been out, I have probably had a jerkbait in my hands 80+% of the time. And our water temps right now are hovering right around 50, 51 degrees. We're getting a cold front right now that will probably drop those down even a little bit more. And now is that time where I really start to slim back on my use of like the glides and the top waters and even to some extent like spinner baits and chatter baits. And I lean very heavily on a jerkbait. So today I want to do a little bit of a jerkbait deep dive, not on the really basic stuff like what a jerkbait is or what gear to throw it on, not that. I want to go and hone in on some of my best jerkbait tips and secrets that I've learned over the years that I really think help me outfish some of my friends that are also fishing a jerkbait. I consider a jerkbait one of my personal strengths as an angler, and these are a few of the reasons why. So let's start out with one of the most important things in jerkbait fishing, the cadence of that jerkbait. And I might go as far as to say that this is the single most important thing in jerkbait fishing, period. It's your cadence, right? It's that timing, that consistency or inconsistency are the single most important things that will get you more bites. It's not the weighting of your jerkbait or the color choice or even the depth or the rattles. It's your cadence. And that's what I love about jerkbait fishing is you can make up for the shortcomings of your actual bait with skill. And I believe that if you gave me the completely wrong color, wrong depth, wrong size jerkbait, and then you give the guy beside me the absolute perfect jerkbait for the conditions, if I have a better cadence, then I'm going to get bit more than he is. I really do believe that. Now, one of the things that's actually helped me learn what fish respond to and what they don't over the last year or two is live scope. And using live sonar of some sort has helped me refine my cadence because you just get real-time feedback if that fish is responding positively or negatively. And that knowledge has helped me when I'm out there just throwing a regular jerkbait normally without live sonar. What I have seen and what I've learned from watching it have helped me the rest of the time. So I pretty much have 3 cadences that I will work through when I'm jerkbait fishing. Number 1 is just my normal cadence. It's like a medium speed, probably like a 3-2 is my kind of go-to. So that's more of like 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, pause, 1, 2, 3, pause, 1, 2, pause, something like that. That's usually kind of my starting point. And then from there, I will tweak it based on how the fish are reacting. So that's kind of like my template. That's just what feels good to me. That's what my, body wants to do. That's kind of the tempo that my body likes. And then I will force myself to speed up or slow down or vary my number of twitches in between pauses or length of pauses or whatever, depending on conditions. And I actually feel like I don't get hit on the pause a ton. It's usually during that 3 twitches or those 2 twitches. So what I'm saying is be ready to sweep with that hook set at any time during your cadence. Now, the second cadence that I will use is my active feeding cadence. And that is going to be a lot less pauses and a lot more constant movement. So you're talking like boom, 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 like that type of thing, right? It's not really having a big defined pause in it. You are just trying to get that fish to react to that bait, and it doesn't need the sort of subtlety of all of those pauses and all of those intricate kind of like patterns and things like that. It just wants constant motion to seek out and attack. Now, with those first 2 cadences, option 1, which is more of like my standard kind of variable cadence, and then option 2, that faster constant cadence, the key to both is consistency. Even in my variable cadence, there is like a feel or a pattern to it. What you don't want to do, in my opinion anyway, is make a cast and 2/3 of the way through the cast, you've been doing one thing the whole time and then you just completely stop or change it up drastically halfway through that cast. From my time observing fish on electronics and watching them follow and decide whether to actually commit or not, the number one thing that gets fish to turn away from that jerkbait is a drastic change in your cadence all of the sudden. So if you're going like 3 twitches, pause, 2 twitches, pause, 3 twitches, pause, 2 twitches, pause, and you have a fish following you for the past, 8 to 10 feet or something, the last thing you want to do is go, your normal 3 and then pause, 2 and then pause, 3 and then pause, and then 10 twitches at like Mach 12. You don't want that. I have watched very interested, very fired up fish peel off so fast at a big change like that in that bait's movement. And the reason I've noticed that is because I have thought to try and do the opposite, right? I've thought to try and say, well, I've had this fish following me for 20 feet. It's not committing, but it's definitely following it. What if I do something crazy? Will that get it to commit? And more times than not, it's the exact opposite. If you do something crazy to try and get that fish to commit, it's done and it moves away and it just doesn't want anything to do with it. So don't make that mistake. Now, the same goes for the opposite way, right? If you're going, boom, 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 and you have that kind of like active feeding cadence and a fish happens to be following it, and then all of a sudden you just kill it and pause it for like 10 seconds, that fish is probably donezo too. I've seen that happen a million times on the screen as well, where I have been, working that jerkbait along, and then I've tried to milk that cast because, I have a follower. I want to like kill it or slow it down so this fish has a little bit more time on this cast and I don't lose it and I just get more opportunity to give this fish a chance to eat. That doesn't seem to work either for me. So what I'm basically saying is if you want to switch it up, do it next cast. Don't do it in the middle of your current cast because you could be jeopardizing a fish that might be almost ready to commit and then you turn them off by doing something drastic. Now, if you have a fish following you and you're running out of cast, I talked about that a second ago, and you're like 15 feet away from the boat, you actually have a better chance of catching that fish by just continuing to do what you were doing, even if that means you only get 3 more seconds with that cast versus stopping or slowing down or trying to milk it for another 10 seconds. Your instinct, obviously, is to give that fish more time, but by doing that, you're actually lowering your chances, not raising them. So that is my opinion. That's what I've observed over the years, and that's what I really, really think separates some of the good jerkbait anglers from the bad jerkbait anglers. Now, the last cadence that I have is for cold water and finicky, lethargic fish, and that's going to be your slow down cadence. And this means 2 things. It means long pauses. Obviously, the colder the water, the clearer the water, the longer my pauses get. But it also means that you actually start to incorporate pulling the bait, not just jerking it. So in very cold water, I will actually sweep my rod tip slowly to give that jerkbait a gentle pull versus a violent jerk or slash or what you're normally doing in more active situations. And I really like doing that with something like a Smithwick Rogue, a Rapala Husky jerk, those sort of bigger, wobbly, kind of walleye style jerkbaits. Those in cold water with some really light pulls can be deadly. So almost everything I do is a variation of those 3 cadences. Your standard variable cadence, which is some semi-consistent pattern of jerks and pauses based on water temps and fish activity. And then you have your active feeding cadence, which is a lot faster and more consistent. And then you have your slowdown with those painfully long pauses and the very light sweeps of the rod tip. But whichever situation that you are in, I think consistency throughout the cast is the major key that helps me catch more fish. Okay, next up here, I also want to talk about depth for a minute. And we all know that jerkbaits come in different shapes and sizes and they dive to different depths, just like you would have with any other kind of like lipped bait. So like a crankbait, for instance, a ton of different diving depths on a crankbait. The longer the bill, the deeper it dives, the smaller the bill, the shallower it stays. So if you are in 10 foot of water, you would normally choose a crankbait, for instance, that dives like 10 to 12 feet because you want to be making contact with the bottom and generating those reaction strikes. Well, I am here to tell you today that that is not what you want to do with jerkbaits. If you are fishing 10 feet of water, I do not want a jerkbait that dives to 10 feet. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of newer or intermediate anglers make, is picking up a jerkbait that dives too deep. With a jerkbait, the magic is its ability to draw fish up. I will repeat that. You want to draw fish up. Fish coming from below the jerkbait are way more likely to come from further away. They're way more likely to actually eat, and they're more likely to eat without having to follow it so far. So if you have fish that are glued to the bottom or hunkered down in rocks or submerged weed beds, a jerkbait the right distance above them is a great way to get those fish to show themselves. So then the next question should be, well, then what's the right depth? Well, for me, there's sort of a happy medium situation here, and it's going to be right around that 3 to 6 feet above the fish. Now, that can drastically change depending on water clarity, time of year, what cover those fish are actually in. But for me, 3 to 6 feet above the bottom or above where those fish are is my target zone. That seems to be that distance where I can get most fish to come up and actually eat. Once you get too far away, they don't want to peel up off the bottom all the time. And if you get too deep, they can ignore it or just scatter because you spook them. Now, I have seen so many situations where it doesn't even seem like there are fish there, but they're just glued to the bottom. But then also I have situations where they're down there on the bottom, but they won't hit bottom baits. They don't want to jig, they don't want to crankbait, they don't want to Ned, and I think sometimes they just don't want something that close to them. Maybe it's because they get too good of a look at it. Maybe it's because it's unnatural to have a big piece of lead on a string dragging right beside them. Or maybe they're down there for a reason. Maybe they're down there because they want to ambush something above them and they're looking up. I don't know what it is, but I do know that I have caught fish when nothing else would work with a jerkbait worked a few feet above what looks like a barren bottom, and then all of a sudden fish eagerly start shooting up off the bottom to look at that jerkbait. So if I'm fishing in 10 feet of water, I want a jerkbait that actually dives about 4 to 7 feet. And in 10 feet of water, if I can get a jerkbait to stay right around that 5 foot off the bottom mark, I'm feeling pretty good. And if I need to get a little bit deeper or closer to that 7 foot mark, let's say, then maybe a little longer cast or a little lighter line will help you do it. And if I'm getting too deep, well, then you can switch jerkbaits. You can use heavier line or mono, or something that I actually do a lot is I change the direction of my rod motion. So if I'm trying to keep that bait up off the bottom in a certain spot and it's going too deep, I will actually stop jerking my rod horizontal like you normally would with a jerkbait or a spook, that type of motion from like right to left or left to right. And I will actually give it a few pops straight up and down. And I don't see people do that a whole lot, but I actually do it a ton. Straight up, short pops, and that will actually help that jerkbait stop digging, and it'll come up just a tad so that you can get another foot or so of depth relief from that jerkbait. And that's a very easy adjustment to make versus switching all of your gear around or changing baits or line or whatever just because you're a foot or two too deep. And then that brings us to where I wanted to end up today, where those two things, your cadence and your depth placement, are the single two most important things in jerkbait fishing. I will stand by that. I have spent too much time with a jerkbait in my hand. I've watched it over the years. Above all else, we should be worrying about our cadence and our depth. The improvement or success that you'll have from all other factors in the equation is incremental at best if you mastered those two. And of course, yes, you should choose the right rod. You want like a kind of medium, sort of moderate fast rod, probably a little shorter, probably in the 6'8" to 7'2" range, depending on personal preference. I use a 6'10". But if I have the right cadence and the right depth, and you make me throw a jerkbait on a medium heavy rod, and you have the right rod but the wrong cadence and depth, I'm still going to catch more fish than you are. So there's almost like a hierarchy to what matters more. The same thing can be said with line choice, right? I like fluoro. Mono is okay in certain situations, and I'm not a fan of braid for jerkbaits. But again, if you give me the right cadence and the right depth, and you make me throw it on braid, and then you have the wrong cadence and the wrong depth, but you have the most expensive fluoro money can buy, I'm still going to outfish you. So that brings us to our last logical ending here, which is the jerkbait selection itself. Yes, it obviously matters what jerkbait you pick, but I think you're going to have a lot of people tell you that the jerkbait selection is factor number 1, and I just do not think that's true. I would put it probably number 3 behind your primary 2 factors from today. Cadence and depth, I think, are your clear 1 and 2. They go hand in hand. And then the selection of your actual jerkbait, like what model, what color, what weight, what hooks, all that kind of stuff, I think is a clear number 3. Because there are factors that matter in the jerkbait selection, obviously. The diving depth of that jerkbait itself matters. I mean, a bait that dives 9 feet and a bait that dives 3 feet are very different jerkbaits, not even just with the depth, but their actual movement themselves. And also same with color. I think because these fish will peel up and follow it, and they get a pretty good look for like a movement or 2 at least, or 10, depending on how long they're following this bait before committing, they get a pretty good look at that bait. And I think color can be a really big deal. I think hook choice is also important. I prefer light wire hooks. Yes, they're going to bend out on you sometimes, but on that lighter rod and lighter line, you get the hook penetration that you need to feel confident in that light sweep of the rod for your hook set. But again, at the end of the day, I do think in the case of jerkbaits, the artist is more important than the brush. If you have a good jerkbait angler and you give them a subpar bait, they're going to outfish you 9 times out of 10, even if you have the absolute perfect bait for the conditions, but you have subpar jerkbait skills. So jerkbait fishing is one of those things where the actual skill is important. I mean, it's not like throwing a whopper plopper or something, right? No shade to whopper ploppers, but just an easy example to kind of pick on here. With a whopper plopper, you throw it out and reel it in. It's really hard to be a good whopper plopper angler or a bad whopper plopper angler. It's just a cast and retrieve bait. And to some extent, you can make that case for a lot of different baits, but jerkbaits certainly are not one of them. There's a lot of nuance to jerkbaits, but if you take one thing away from today's episode, I'm going to keep hammering it home because it's that important. The depth that you fish that bait at and the motion that you impart on that bait are the two most important things in jerkbait fishing. To recap, for depth, you don't want a bait that goes all the way to the bottom most of the time. You want to keep it in sort of that perfect distance above the bottom or above the cover that those fish are in, just above the top of those weeds or just a few feet above the rocks that they're hiding in. That magic depth for me, like I said, is about 3 to 6 feet above, but it varies depending on the situation. And then the pattern and the timing and the consistency of your motion that you're putting on that bait also matters a ton. There really is this sort of consistently inconsistent side of that pattern, of course, that you have to kind of master. So it's like, 3 twitches, pause, 2 twitches, pause, 3 twitches, pause, 1 twitch, pause, 2 twitches, pause, 3 twitches, pause. You vary it up, but you stay inside the lines of that cadence. You almost have a groove right there for you like musicians out there, right? You just kind of stay within the bass line. You can do some improvisation, but you got to stay on key. You stay in that pentatonic scale or whatever you're in. As a guitar guy myself, I think that's a pretty fitting analogy for any of you that might be in the same boat. That's really what you have to do with the cadence in your jerkbait. What you don't want to do is all of a sudden halfway through that cast, you have been doing this like 2 pause, 3 pause, 1 pause, 2 pause, 3 pause, 1 pause type deal. And then all of a sudden you do 12 really fast jerks and then you stop for 10 seconds and completely kill it. And then you pick your pattern back up. That's not what you want to do. You want to keep it within that overall feel of the cadence. I know that sounds kind of hippy dippy sometimes, but I don't really know how else to explain it. So to kind of summarize really fast, I think some things in life are a science, some things in life are an art, and I think jerkbait fishing lies somewhere in between the two. So I hope that helps you guys a little bit today. The weather is turning. It's getting colder out there. We're about to get some snow for the first time here in Ohio, and it's time to break out that box of jerkbaits and put them to work. Okay, and finally here today, we do have one mailbag question that I picked out specifically for today's episode because I thought it fit our topic pretty nicely here. This message is from Kara, and she says, "Hey Andrew, first time writing in. Thanks for putting together such a great show. I recently found Tackle Talk a few months ago, and I've been binging ever since. As a newer angler, having just started bass fishing seriously in the last few years, I've made some awesome strides with a lot of baits, but the one that I'm still having a lot of trouble with is jerkbaits, specifically where to throw them. The areas that I fish have a little bit of everything: weeds, rocks, and timber. What areas should I reach for a jerkbait versus others?" And now you guys can see why I picked this question out. Kara, that is a great question, and hopefully the majority of this episode helped a little bit with some tips to be a better jerkbait angler all around, again, focusing on that depth and that cadence. But one thing that we didn't talk about is where to throw the jerkbaits. And that is because every river or every lake or every body of water is very different, but here are a few things that I look for to tell me when I should consider throwing a jerkbait purely off of the fishery itself. We're not talking weather, clarity, nothing like that. We are talking about characteristics of the fishery. So the first thing that I see that just sends that light off in my brain that I should reach for a jerkbait is weed beds on the bottom. So I want a weed bed on the bottom with plenty of room in between the tops of the weeds and the surface of the water. So for example, let's say we're in 14 feet of water and there are weeds on the bottom that come up about 3 or 4 feet off the bottom. Well, that's going to leave about 10 feet of water in between the tops of those weeds and the top of the water column. And that's perfect for me. 10 feet is plenty of room to work with. And if I get down to within a foot or two of the tops of those weeds, even if those fish are all the way on the bottom in those weeds, that still puts me in that magic 3 to 6 feet above the fish. And those fish will shoot out of those weeds and eat that jerkbait a lot of times, even if you don't know there are fish down there. You're just guessing. It's great habitat. It's a great hiding spot. It's worth throwing that jerkbait over and seeing if anything shoots out. So getting close to the tops of submerged vegetation where fish can be hiding is a great place to start and reach for a jerkbait. If nothing else, because those weeds make it really hard to fish a lot of other things. You almost can't throw any sort of bottom contact bait because all you're going to pick up is weeds. So a jerkbait actually lets you fish those weeds from above the weeds, if that makes sense. Now, the second thing that I will actually look for in a fishery is frequent depth changes. So humps or drop-offs, ledges, points, varying depth to any degree, because what I've seen so many times is, say you have like a hump out in the middle of that lake or out in the middle of your river swing. I've seen so many times where there are fish right on top of that hump or right on top of that big point, but that hump might come up and only give you like 3 or 4 feet of water to work with between the top of the hump and the actual top of the water. It could get real shallow, but then it drops off to like 10 or 12 feet. Well, if I cast over that hump, slowly work that jerkbait on that hump where those fish actually are, they often won't bite it when it's right near them or in their face or right there on top of that hump where they're sitting. Remember, we talked about that a little bit earlier, that I feel like sometimes they just don't want it right in their face. But once you start to work that bait away from the hump and it heads toward that open water and over that drop-off, fish will chase it from their spot on the hump over that drop off and eat it. It's like they almost want more room, or they want more of a chase to it, or to be able to follow it. I don't know if that's because it's like more vulnerable once it starts to venture out toward that open water. They just have more room to work with. I don't know. But I do know that I get bit a ton as soon as that bait starts to come right over that drop off. And maybe they were right on the top of that hump. Maybe they were actually below right on that drop off, waiting for something to come over them and ambush it from below and they shoot up. Who knows? But depth change gives places for those fish to hide and places for them to ambush from. And it also gives an opportunity for that jerkbait to be seen from different depths. And the fish will actually use those drop-offs and those points to kind of pin fish and sort of box in their prey. And they just make great hunting spots. Now, if you remember a few weeks back when we had researcher Colin Dasso on, he said, and I can't remember exactly what it was called, I should go back and look, but he called it something like arena forage theory or something like that. Basically, it meant the relationship between predator and prey has a lot to do with the arena in which the hunting takes place. And depth change is a great arena for jerkbaits and for most baits in general. It's just a great arena for fish to actually have areas to kind of sit and hide and kind of manipulate their surroundings a little bit versus a big flat wasteland of, like 8 foot of water that just goes on for hundreds and hundreds of yards and there's nothing going on. I would much rather fish in an area that goes from like 3 foot to 12 foot to 5 foot to 10 foot. All of those little humps and valleys and all of those are great spots for fish to ambush from. So those are 2 things that I would look for, Kara. I would look for submerged weeds and I would look for frequent depth changes. Okay, so there you go, folks. There is a whole episode on nothing but jerkbaits, and not so much on the bait choice itself, but in my opinion, what really matters and what will give you an advantage out there on the water. So I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Go pick up the jerkbaits. 'Tis the season. I hope you guys have a lot of success on them in the coming months. If you are like me and you live in the Midwest or the Northeast or anywhere like that, trust me, jerkbaits should be a staple of your fishing game for the next couple months. All right, everybody, that is today's episode. Thank you guys so much for listening. I appreciate you all. If you did enjoy the episode, go toss us a 5-star review on Apple or Spotify. If you could, we'd really appreciate that. Be sure to keep up with us on Instagram and Facebook at Tackle Talk Podcast. And we'll see you right back here next Tuesday for another brand new episode of Tackle Talk.
Thank you for listening to the Tackle Talk Podcast. Tackle Talk is produced by Andrew Hayes. Copyright 2019. For more, please subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts.